At the Christmas party, my son leaned in close. The lights were twinkling, music was playing, and people were raising glasses of spiced cider. It was supposed to be a warm evening, a family moment, but then he whispered, loud enough for his wife and friends to hear. "Loving your $5,000 allowance, Mom?" He said it with a smirk, like it was a joke, like I was in on it, like I wasn't just shrinking in the middle of the room. I smiled. That's all I did. I didn't say a word, didn't let my hands tremble, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I walked to the corner table where they had put my name card, next to the coat rack. Facing the kitchen door, I sat alone, watching the people I once called family clink glasses and laugh. The scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air, but it didn't reach me. From my corner seat, I watched the party unfold like a play I hadn't been cast in. My son, David, laughed loudly with his business partners near the fireplace. Natalie, his wife, floated across the room like she owned it, refilling wine glasses and collecting compliments on the holiday decor she hadn't even arranged herself. She never looked in my direction, not once. I stirred the untouched cider in my cup, watching the slice of orange bob near the rim. Someone had placed a candy cane on my napkin, red and white, twisted and sweet, the only thing at that table that felt honest. No one noticed that I wasn't smiling. The music swelled again, some jazzy version of "Let It Snow." I thought about the year David was 9. We couldn't afford gifts, so I stitched a stocking by hand and filled it with homemade treats. He had hugged me for 10 minutes straight that morning, said it was the best Christmas ever. And now? Now, he gave me $5,000 a month, and a chair by the kitchen door. I didn't want the money. I never asked for it. But when my husband passed, David insisted on helping out. His words, not mine. At first, I thought it was love. Then I realized it was leverage. It bought him the right to joke at my expense, to seat me like an afterthought, to remind me, especially in front of others, that I was being taken care of. I could have stood up, walked out, slammed the front door. But that's not what mothers do. At least not the kind of mother I've been all my life. So I stayed. I watched. I let the humiliation simmer quietly in the pit of my stomach while I counted the ornaments on the tree. 56. Each one glittered under the lights, just like Natalie's diamond earrings. She passed by once, carrying a tray of gingerbread cookies. She leaned in and whispered, "You look lovely tonight, Marilyn." Then added with a smile only I could hear, "That coat must be from last season. Right?" I said nothing. I simply adjusted the sleeves of my wool coat, yes, the same one from last winter, and turned my eyes back to the tree. Some battles don't need swords. Just memory. And silence. Because silence lets you see who's really watching. And that night, someone was. But I'll get to that soon. That seat by the kitchen door? It wasn't new. Last Thanksgiving, they put me next to the garage for more legroom. David said. On Natalie's birthday, they sent a group text asking who could bring wine. When I volunteered, she replied, "Oh, don't worry, Marilyn, we've got it handled." I still showed up with 3 bottles. None were opened. And the family photo they posted last summer? I was taking the picture. So no, this Christmas party wasn't a shock. It was just the loudest reminder yet. I took a small bite of the cookie Natalie handed me earlier. Too sweet. Too perfect, like everything else she touched. Across the room, David was showing off their new custom wine fridge. Italian import, he said proudly. Mom helped us with that one. He didn't say how. But everyone understood. They laughed politely. I kept chewing. No one mentioned the little things anymore. How I watched Emma when their nanny was sick. How I drove across town to pick up Tommy's science project when they forgot. How I canceled my doctor's appointment last month so they could use my car. These weren't grand sacrifices. Just what mothers do. But mothers eventually disappear in these stories. We become footnotes. Or punchlines. And David had started to treat me like both. What hurt wasn't the money. Or the jokes. It was the shift. The way he didn't see me anymore, not really. The way he touched Natalie's shoulder like she was porcelain but handed me things without looking. The way he called me, Mom, with a grin that said, mascot. Not mother. I stared at my hands under the tablecloth. The skin had thinned. The veins were more visible. I used to carry David on these arms. He once called them the safest place in the world. Now they were just hands, attached to someone who wrote checks and took up space near the kitchen. But I wasn't just watching David that night. I was watching Natalie. The way she moved, the way she glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her smile tightened when I spoke to the kids. Something was off. And it wasn't just Christmas tension. It was deeper, older, like a crack that had been there for years, finally catching the light. I filed it away, like every other small thing, because I knew I was being watched too. And the moment would come when all these details would matter. It was near the end of the evening when Emma, my granddaughter, tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, "why do you always sit alone at these parties?" Her voice was small, but the question wasn't. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say? That her father had decided I was more useful in the shadows? That her mother didn't want me too close? So I smiled instead. "Just keeping an eye on everyone," I said softly. She nodded like she believed it, like I was some kind of secret guardian angel. But even she could sense it. The distance. The lights sparkled across the glass punch bowl on the buffet table. I stared at my reflection, warped by the curve of the crystal. The woman looking back wasn't quite me. She looked edited. And I started to wonder, how long had I been disappearing like this? Not just from holiday photos, but from conversations, decisions, even their memories? It hadn't started at Christmas. It had started long before. Years ago, when David first married Natalie, she insisted I take a break from hosting Thanksgiving. "You've done enough, Marilyn," she said sweetly. "Let us take care of it this year." I agreed. I thought she was being thoughtful. That was the last time Thanksgiving was ever at my house. They said the dining room was too small, that the parking was difficult, that it made more sense to rotate holidays between families. But somehow, it always rotated away from me. I was still invited, at first. Then the invites got later. Then the texts replaced the calls. Then Natalie started tagging me in photos after the parties had happened. Once, I asked David about it. He said, "You know how busy things get. Mom, you're not mad, right?" I wasn't, not then. Because I didn't realize it was a pattern. A gentle erasure. Natalie never shouted. She didn't need to. She edited me out with smiles and scheduling conflicts. With brunches I wasn't told about. With photos where I was always on the edge, or missing completely. And David? He let it happen. Maybe it was easier for him that way. Maybe I reminded him of a time when life was messier, harder, when he still needed someone. Now, he only needed a signature on birthday checks. A reliable guest who never overstayed her welcome. A symbol of a mother. Without the substance. I took another sip of cold cider and glanced around the room. Emma was back with her cousins, laughing. David was taking selfies with friends. Natalie stood beside him, smiling like the night had gone perfectly. And for them, maybe it had. But for me? It was the night I stopped pretending. I didn't know what would come next. But something had shifted. A crack in the glass had finally reached the edge. I was standing near the back hallway when I heard it. Natalie, on her phone, her voice low but not low enough. "I told him we should just wire the money and skip these pity parties," she said, "but David insists she needs to feel included." There was a pause. Then laughter. Hers. A sharp, clipped sound like glass breaking. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just listened. Long enough to understand that it wasn't the first time she'd said things like this. And it wouldn't be the last. So that's what I was now. A task. A monthly expense with a smile slapped on it. She turned the corner and froze when she saw me. Her smile flickered. "Oh, hi, just checking in on the caterers. You know how chaotic these things get." I nodded. "Of course." She walked past me quickly, her heels clicking like punctuation. And I stood there for a moment longer, letting her words settle where they didn't belong. That was the first time I didn't just feel excluded. I felt erased. Deliberately. Not by accident, not by time, but by choice. And for the first time, I stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. Back at the table, I folded my napkin slowly, my hands steady. David passed by a few minutes later. He looked tired, distracted. Having fun, Mom? He asked, barely stopping. I always do, I said quietly. He didn't hear the edge in my voice. Or maybe he did, and ignored it. That's when someone else spoke. It was Helen, my sister's oldest friend. She had known me since college. She leaned in, touched my hand, and whispered, I don't know what's going on here, Marilyn, but you don't deserve that tone. I saw how he spoke to you earlier. It caught me off guard. Not because I didn't believe her, but because someone finally saw it. Really saw it. I looked at her, kind, aging eyes. No agenda, just honesty. You've always been the strong one, she said. Don't let them chip away at that. I nodded once, didn't trust myself to speak. For the rest of the evening, I didn't move from my seat. But something inside me did. Helen's words didn't undo what had happened. But they gave it shape. A name, a witness. And when you know you're not imagining the cruelty, when someone else validates what you've silently endured, it changes everything. They thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was. I always had been. And now, I was done collecting excuses. It was time to start collecting proof. After Helen's words, I started watching differently. Not with sadness. Not even with anger. But with clarity. I watched how Natalie always touched David's elbow before she spoke. Like a cue. How David's jaw clenched whenever I offered to help with anything. How the children had stopped hugging me first when I walked in. How they looked at their mother for silent permission before doing anything that involved me. None of this had happened overnight. It had been gradual, like being moved, inch by inch, toward the edge of a photo until you're no longer in the frame. Natalie didn't look at me like a person anymore. She looked at me like a variable, a factor in her calculations. She managed everything, schedules, parties, appearances, and I had become an outdated element in her design. One she couldn't erase completely, but could slowly fade. And David? He let her. Whether out of comfort, laziness, or blind devotion, I couldn't tell anymore. But he watched her do it. And he said nothing. At one point that evening, while the kids were tearing open small presents, I saw Natalie lean in and whisper something into David's ear. They both looked at me. Just for a second. Then turned away. I didn't flinch. Didn't ask. Didn't let them see that I noticed. Because I was done asking. Instead, I started remembering. Not just the words. But the patterns. Like how my birthday had slipped their minds last year. But Natalie's spa weekend got booked 3 months in advance. How David forgot my knee surgery date, but hosted a full Super Bowl party the same day. How I had been sending $5 a month to help with the grandkids, and yet never saw a single photo of what it helped pay for. So I began to do something I hadn't done before. I started writing things down. Not in a dramatic, revengeful way. Just quiet documentation. Dates. Comments. Bank transfers. Snippets of overheard conversations. Screenshots. Emails with accidental exclusions. I didn't know what I'd use it for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I knew one thing. They thought I was invisible. That made me powerful. Because when people think you're not watching, they reveal everything. And I was watching. From my chair near the kitchen door. Where no one thinks anything important is happening. It happened near the dessert table. Emma was balancing a plate of cookies when she turned to me and asked, "Grandma, are you coming on the cruise with us this summer?" I paused. "What cruise, sweetheart?" She blinked. "The family cruise. Daddy said we're all going. Except you, because you don't like boats." I smiled. But something inside me cracked. Clean and silent. They hadn't told me anything about a cruise. No invitation. No mention. And I had never said I didn't like boats. That was the story they'd created. An absence rewritten as a preference. A decision disguised as consideration. Emma skipped off, humming to herself, unaware she had just confirmed everything I feared. I walked over to the hallway and took out my phone. Searched, David Alaska Cruise. A public photo popped up. Natalie's Instagram. It was from 2 weeks ago. Caption. Family memories in the making. Counting down to July. There were likes, comments, inside jokes. I scrolled. Nothing tagged me. No mention of me. As if I didn't exist in the world they were building. I took a screenshot. Saved it in the new folder I had quietly created, Red Flags. That folder was growing fast. Inside were copies of every monthly transfer receipt. Email threads where I was CC'd too late. A voice memo from the birthday dinner where Natalie introduced me as David's mom. She's visiting from upstate. When I lived 15 minutes away. All small things. Each deniable on its own. But together? They told a very different story. And now Emma, without meaning to, had handed me the final thread. Not because she was cruel. But because children tell the truth we try to cover. I looked back at the party. David was opening another bottle of wine. Natalie was posing with a tray of peppermint bark. Their lives looked perfect. Curated. Controlled. But they had forgotten one thing. The woman by the kitchen door had stopped playing along. And soon, the truth they thought they'd hidden in whispers and omissions would speak louder than they ever expected. It was nearly midnight when I found myself alone in the hallway again. Coat draped over my arm. Ready to leave. The house had quieted. Most guests had gone. Only a few lingered in the living room. Voices soft. Glasses half full. I was slipping on my gloves when Linda approached. She used to be our housekeeper. Stayed with us for over 10 years. Back when David still lived at home. She now worked part-time for Natalie's family, mostly on weekends. I hadn't seen her all night. She must have been in the kitchen or helping with cleanup. Mrs. Marilyn, she said gently, do you have a second? I turned. Of course. She hesitated, looked around, then leaned in. I probably shouldn't say this. She whispered, but I just wanted you to know, you're not imagining it. That sentence stopped me. She continued, the way they treat you. The way they talk about you when you're not around. It's not right. I said nothing. Just listened. They think I don't hear things. She said, but I do. Natalie complains you linger too long. David says he feels guilty, but still makes jokes about your allowance like it's some punchline. I stared at the floor. Carpeted, clean, polished. Everything in this house was staged. Even the affection. Linda's voice softened. But the kids adore you. Emma talks about your banana bread every week. And Tommy still uses that little flashlight you gave him for camping. You matter more than they want to admit. I looked up. Her eyes were kind, steady. You were always good to me. She added, and I see things. I remember. A pause. Then she reached into her pocket. I shouldn't be showing you this, she said, handing me a folded piece of paper. But I found this left on the counter after Natalie's call with the cruise planner. It's the guest list. I unfolded it. 7 names. David, Natalie, their kids, Natalie's parents, Natalie's sister. No, Mom. No, Marilyn. Not even in pencil. I took a deep breath. Carefully folded the paper again. Thank you, I said quietly. Linda nodded. You didn't deserve to be erased. Those words stayed with me the entire drive home. More than the money. More than the party. More than the empty chair and cold cider. It was the deliberate erasure that cut deepest. And now, someone else had witnessed it. Had spoken it out loud. Had placed it into my hands in ink. I wasn't angry. I was awake. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from rage. Not even from sadness. I stayed awake because for the first time in a long time, things made sense. The way they excluded me wasn't casual. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was design. I sat at my kitchen table, lights low, tea cooling untouched, and began sorting through what I already had. Emails, screenshots, voicemails. Tiny digital fingerprints they thought would fade. I printed everything, filed it neatly, highlighted names, dates, timestamps. Labeled each folder with quiet precision. Bank transfers 2020 present. Missed events. Public posts, comments. Cruise guest list. And now. Testimony, Linda. I wasn't planning a scandal. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. And maybe one day, protection. Because people like Natalie rewrite history fast. And David? He'd let her do it, until he needed someone to blame. But I wouldn't be their scapegoat. Not again. I found an old voice memo from last March. David had called late, asking for an advance on Emma's tuition. Said he'd pay it back, even though it was framed as a gift. The way he said, "You're the only one who understands," had sounded sweet at the time. Now, it sounded strategic. I labeled the file, Emma tuition call, March 18th. At 3:12 a.m., I opened a blank document and started writing. Not a letter. Not a diary. Just a statement. For me. I was not a burden. I was not bitter. I was present. They tried to erase me anyway. It wasn't poetry, but it felt like truth. I backed everything up twice, one hard drive, one cloud folder, gave the hard copy binder a neutral label and placed it behind my cookbooks. By sunrise, I had compiled more in 6 hours than they had given me in 6 years. I looked around my small kitchen. Familiar, quiet, mine. Unlike David's house, nothing here pretended. The tiles were chipped, the kettle whistled too loud, the fridge door leaned slightly. But it was real. I belonged here. And from this place, my place, I would decide what happened next. I didn't confront them. Not yet. There was no dramatic phone call. No teary confrontation. That's not how people like me fight. We choose silence. Then structure. The first thing I did was stop the transfers. I called the bank, calmly, and instructed them to suspend the monthly automatic deposits to David's account. No explanation, no emotion. The banker asked, "Is everything okay, Mrs. Mitchell?" I smiled, just simplifying. Next, I called my estate planner. We hadn't spoken since my husband passed, but she remembered me. I scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday. Brought a binder. She flipped through the folders I laid out across the desk, said very little, took notes, listened closely. "I want to make some updates," I said, discreetly. By the time I left her office, the trust was being revised. Names removed. Provisions added. Control reclaimed. Then I called Emma's school. I asked if it was possible to make direct payments for her tuition moving forward. They said yes, easily, happily. Which meant David wouldn't be able to use her as leverage anymore. 3 quiet changes. No confrontation. No drama. But everything shifted. A week later, David texted me. "Hey Mom, noticed the wire didn't hit. Everything all right?" I didn't answer. The next day, another text. "Natalie said you seemed off at the party. Did something happen?" Still no reply. 2 days later, I got a call. I let it ring. I needed him to feel what silence really sounded like. Not passive, not petty, but powerful. Because when a woman like me stops explaining herself, that's when people start asking the real questions. The first time David showed up at my house unannounced, it was raining. He didn't knock right away. I saw him through the window, sitting in his car, parked a little too straight, like he had rehearsed this moment on the way over. When he finally rang the bell, I waited a full 10 seconds before answering. "Mom," he said, smiling too quickly. "Everything okay? You haven't answered my calls." I stepped aside, let him in. Didn't offer coffee. Didn't ask how he was. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my kitchen. Looked smaller than I remembered. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "You seemed a little off at Christmas." I nodded. "Did I?" He shifted. "Yeah, I mean, Natalie was worried, too. We just hope everything's all right." I let the silence stretch. Then said, "It's kind of you to worry." He paused. "The allowance, we noticed it stopped. If something's going on financially, I can help. Just let me know." I smiled. "No, David, nothing's going on financially." He didn't know what to do with that. "So, why stop it?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked. At the son I had raised. The boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. The man who now stood in front of me, confused by the idea that I might make choices without consulting him first. Because I wanted to, I said. He blinked. But, we count on that. I raised an eyebrow. I know. His mouth opened, then closed. Did Natalie put you up to this? He asked, suddenly sharper. I tilted my head. Put me up to stopping the payments to her own account? That's an interesting theory. His face reddened. That's not what I meant. It's just, we've all got routines. Expectations. I nodded, and I'm adjusting mine. He stood in silence. For once, I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't offer reassurance. Didn't justify. Didn't soften the blow. I let him sit with the discomfort. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can give someone is the consequence of their own behavior. 2 weeks later, I got a card in the mail. Not a call, not a visit. A card. It was from Natalie. The front was glossy and festive, snowflakes. Gold lettering. Inside, she had written, "Sorry if anything came off the wrong way at Christmas. We value you. Let's plan something soon." No signature. Just her name in quick, sharp cursive. There was no mention of the cruise. No mention of the guest list. No mention of the allowance. Just words. Smooth, vague. Polite enough to pass for effort. Cold enough to keep her safe. I placed the card in the drawer. Not in the trash. Not on the fridge. Just somewhere quiet, where forgotten things live. Last weekend, I baked banana bread for Emma. I delivered it to her school myself. Dropped it off with the front desk and asked that they give it to her during lunch. No note. No message. Just warmth, wrapped in foil and memory. The kind of love that doesn't ask for credit. David hasn't called since. And I haven't needed him to. Because this wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd given away. Permission. Permission to be spoken to however they pleased. To be edited out. To be tolerated like background noise. I took that permission back. It's quiet in my house now. But it's the kind of quiet I choose. No cold smiles. No half invitations. No performance. Just me. And in that silence, I'm not invisible. I'm not erased. I'm present. And that's more than enough.